a warrior's courage. I would submit they are cowardly. The Reaper's Hellfire missiles, or 500-pound bombs, that carries both, come like a bolt out of the blue. Their victims never knew it hit them. Surely these victims are survived by relatives, friends, and neighbors, who may well bear enduring hostility toward the U.S. In some instances, where the death toll is high enough, these attacks can be considered massacres. The attacks violate international law. They are war crimes. War crimes committed by our nation with our tax money. Some might say, therefore, with our complicity. Now understand that Pakistan is no ordinary country. Like over a fifth of the human species, Pakistan is Islamic. Thanks to the drone attacks, Pakistan has hundreds of thousands of displaced people, fleeing the death pouring out of the skies. Pakistan is extremely volatile. Pakistan is a powerful military and a notoriously corrupt and shaky government. It has nuclear weapons. These realities mean that drone attacks are likely to lead to unmanageable, unpredictable consequences. The Reaper drone attacks on Pakistan are clandestine military and CIA operations with little or no accountability. The CIA drones are said to be piloted from airfields in Virginia and launched from secret airstrips in Pakistan by so-called civilian contractors, that is, mercenaries, men outside any chain of command. By contrast to the CIA operations in Pakistan, the Reaper drones, now operating over Iraq and Afghanistan, are mostly piloted by the U.S. military. The Reaper drone operates right in our backyard. Several miles outside Syracuse, New York, lies Hancock Air Base, the home of 174th Attack Wing of the New York State Air National Guard. Now, this is something, the name changed a couple of years ago from Flight Wing to Attack Wing. Now, something we need to ask ourselves is, when is an attack ever legal, ever moral? Hancock, formerly an F-16 fighter jet base, is now the National Maintenance Center for the Reaper drone. Hancock technicians pilot the Reaper drone. In other words, like it or not, upstate New York is part of the war zone and subject to retaliation. Few upstate New Yorkers, except perhaps our congressional representatives, were consulted about becoming part of this war zone. There were no poll, no plebiscite, no public hearings to check whether we wanted the Reaper drone in our midst. So this has some implications for the nature of our democracy here in the U.S. The hunter-killer Reaper drone maintained at Hancock is built by General Atomics, Inc., a private corporation out of San Diego. General Atomics is one of a number of corporations profiting from the various U.S. wars overseas. Few, besides such war profiteering corporations, and some who have made a career in the military or working with military suppliers, gain anything from war. And let's not forget the oil companies. After all, controlling Mideast and Western Asian oil reserves is what our incessant wars over there are mostly about. But it's these few corporate players who subsidize the politicians and fraternize with the generals and provide them with cushy jobs in the empire. It is these few players who corrupt our Congress, which in turn finances the Pentagon's voracious appetite for enemies. The Reaper has extraordinary surveillance capabilities. It can hover unseen and unheard, miles above particular targets. Whether these be particular apartment buildings or homes, the Reaper can track the movements of particular vehicles or individuals. The drone's heat-seeking instrumentation reportedly can tell whether an automatic weapon had recently been fired. With its infrared technology, the Reaper can see in the dark. You can see through the clouds. The Reaper's cameras send back to its pilots an incessant stream of real-time images. These allow their pilots to make their life and death decisions about whom to spare and whom to dismember or incinerate. The 100-kilo Reaper drone is the Pentagon's darling. Unlike the very costly F-16 fighter jet, which it has been replacing, the Reaper drone can be quickly manufactured and is pretty cheap, only $10 or $12 million a pop. So cheap, in fact, that it's expendable. It can be used for more risky missions. The Reaper is portable. It can be disassembled and transported overseas, air or land, and then reassembled at hidden airstrips close to the action. Unlike a jet, the Reaper can hover over a target for hours. Thanks to its laser-guided high-tech ordnance, Hellfire missiles and 500-pound bombs, the Reaper's so-called kill radius is very narrow. In other words, if a drone targeted us here, in this auditorium, folks next door might well go unscathed. Across the board. Because the Reaper is a robot, there's no crew to get hungry, or chilled, or exhausted, or to misinterpret or disobey orders. There's no crew to be shot down and captured or killed. This means no body bags coming back to the U.S., which means no one back home is getting upset that our boys are dying over there. The hype around drones is that they save lives. Admittedly a strong selling point. Unless, of course, you think that the lives of Pakistani or Afghan children, for example, have some value. In Pakistan, the CIA uses the Reaper, especially to assassinate enemy leaders, or rather, those on pretty sketchy grounds it believes might be enemy leaders. Does it really believe the many hundreds it's killed in Pakistan are all Al-Qaeda leaders? To understand the impact drones have on their victims, I strongly encourage you to spend time with this book. It's called Living Under Drones. You can download it free, or you can pick up a copy over the table there for $7. This study is by Stanford University Law School and NYU Law School. They spent some weeks over in Pakistan a couple of years ago interviewing survivors of drone attacks. It's very well documented. It's written by very good legal minds, and it's very accessible as well. In my experience, in my reading and research on drones, this is the best way to get a sense for what it's like to be at the other end of the drone. Now, Ben and I are from Syracuse. In Syracuse, there are a number of us working to make upstate New Yorkers aware of the Reaper in our midst. We keep holding demonstrations, large and small, at the entrance of Hancock Air Base, on East Malloy Road in the town of DeWitt, a suburb of Syracuse. Activists come from Albany and Buffalo and Binghamton and Ithaca and New York City and beyond from out of state. Every first and third Tuesday from 4:15 to 5 p.m. at the shift change at the base, a handful of us have been out there for several years demonstrating against the killer drones. Our grassroots group, which we began with the title Upstate Drone Action, and now some know us as Upstate New York Coalition to Ground the Drones and End the Wars. We begin with the premise that war and killing are wrong, that they are immoral. The Reaper is an instrument of death par excellence. Under the Nuremberg principles, if we know such a major evil exists, and we know our money is helping to pay for it, our taxes, we have a responsibility to try to expose and counteract it. And that's what our state drone action is all about. We've had over 160 arrests out of Hancock Air Base. And we've had a number of people go to jail and prison. Estimates vary, but for every enemy leader the Reaper kills, many, maybe 50 civilians are killed. The Reaper causes a disproportionate number of civilian casualties. I don't know what a disproportionate number is. I don't know why any civilians should be murdered. Now, setting aside for a moment the question of whether killing enemy leaders is moral, outside of combat, it is obviously immoral to kill non-combatants or civilians. Do we really think that our oil-guzzling, global warming, militarized civilization is worth all the killing? The Reaper has become a tool of state terrorism. It is an instrument of terror. By terrorism, I mean the use of force to harm or intimidate civilians for political purposes. Now, it's not my definition. It's the U.S. State Department's definition, and one that the U.S. pundits and politicians almost never would cite. Consider the implications of killing or threatening to kill civilians. The implications of knowing that that is terrorism, and that we mean the Pentagon, U.S. government, are perpetrating that policy. After World War II, after the Nuremberg trials, the U.S. and its allies hanged war criminals. It hanged those death camp commandants. But even those criminals were afforded due process. Now, the extrajudicial executions occur with no due process. The Hancock pilots and their chain of command play investigator, prosecutor, judge, and executioner. They play God. Drone technology makes it so easy to kill. Drone technology also makes it so easy to violate the sovereignty of nations. Pakistan is a prime example of such violation. Letting a bunch of gung-ho militarists and mercenaries violate another nation's sovereignty can get us into a heap of trouble. Already, Reapers are being used over other nations, such as Somalia, Yemen, Libya, with whom the U.S. Congress has found no reason to declare war. Clearly, the Reaper makes mission creep so easy. It's funny how this Christian nation of ours is so inclined to almost exclusively attack Islamic nations. We need to challenge the Islamophobia we've become so infected with. Is it just because they got the oil, or does what they were doing? A further problem with the Reaper is that for now it tends to be used in remote mountain or desert areas, where they can operate with a high degree of clandestinity. The civilian death rates in those regions are difficult to monitor. Further, this technology distances both those of us who pay for the war and those who plan and implement war from the consequences of our actions. It makes war into a computer game. something that seems sanitary and merely simulated. I don't know how we're doing time is here. I can go on a few more minutes, but that works. There's another aspect of the Reaper Revolution, and that is blowback. The unintended negative consequences of ill-considered military actions. Two fairly recent examples, 2 or 3 years ago. Faisal Shahzad, the handsome young man who a couple of years ago tried to detonate a bomb in Times Square. This U.S. citizen, who had visited his family's homeland, Pakistan, said he did what he did because he was so appalled by what the Reaper had done to so many people in his home country. Now, we may find vengeance a pretty sorry motivation, I do, but it certainly seems to be a powerful one. After all, the U.S. probably wouldn't have gotten bogged down in Afghanistan for all these years if a certain George W. Bush and his neocon pals weren't able to ratchet up this country's thirst for vengeance. Misplaced thirst, by the way, after 9/11. Another example of blowback, the physician-turned-suicide bomber who wormed his way into a Reaper launching base in Pakistan, killing a large handful of mercenaries whose job it was to launch Reapers. Not to pilot them. The piloting is done thousands of miles away, but to actually physically launch them. We'll never know how many other individuals appalled by U.S. state terrorism have become and will become resistors and terrorists, targeting those they hold responsible for the mayhem wreaked on their countrymen and women. We can only pray that more of the Reapers' chickens don't come home to roost. I must also mention drone proliferation. We've seen how since 1945, the atomic genie has burst its bottom, multiplying the threat to us all. Hiroshima and Nagasaki ushered in a new era, a new moment in the menace that plagues this bloody planet. The robotics revolution is ushering in a somewhat parallel new era, another moment in that menace. Dozens of countries are now importing or building their own drones. The U.S. and Israel, both on the cutting edge of drone technology, are developing thriving drone industries. Israel, a pioneer of drone development, sells its drones to Turkey, India, Russia, Brazil, and numerous other countries. Do such exports make the world safer? One thing a government might do to reduce the growing proliferation danger is to tell Israel, stop exporting drones, or we will stop providing you with $3 billion a year in military aid. In closing, I want to point out just one more aspect of the robotic revolution now upon us. Already drones are used by military and border police to monitor the U.S.-Mexican and U.S.-Canadian borders. This in itself raises issues about immigration policy, too tangled, of course, to get into here. But we have to at least consider the question, if high-flying, high-tech surveillance aircraft are being used on our borders, where else domestically are such aircraft being used? Who defines how narrow or how broad those border regions can be? And what's to keep them from expanding to cover all of upstate New York, all of New York, or all of Pennsylvania, or all of, well, you get the picture. In other words, what is to keep drone surveillance technology from coming home to roost? The prospect of such drone mission creep is truly creepy. And doesn't such technology tip the scales even further in favor of the militarists who have already gotten us into such a mess internationally, and who surely seek to suppress dissent domestically? Thank you.
Before we begin, can I invite people to close their laptops and close their iPhones and all that? Thank you.
Maybe they're taking notes.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. All right, sorry. Apologies. This is so awesome. You guys are great.
And give me a sense, because the speakers are pointing at you all, if this is too loud, not loud enough, okay?
Don't take your goddamn number. You need to turn that off. I'm really tired of this shit.
174th is a Air National Guard unit. Our mission is in Kinane, Reaper, to bring the main mission of intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance to the support unit. This is the MQ-9. You'll see a big bump on the front of the airplane. Underneath this radome would be a satellite dish, a small satellite dish, and that's actually what's picking up the signal. And then obviously reverse routing up through that satellite dish to the satellite back to the operators where we're operating from. We have the ground control station here for the MQ-9. And what you see obviously is a two-person crew, all the systems that are feeding the information to the pilot that he or she needs to get the mission done. Now that we have the MQ-9 mission, obviously we're flying the mission every day in and day out, 24/7. And like you said, the operators leave the mission at the end of the day and they go home. So it has its challenges. They have to kind of compartmentalize that mission that they do at the end of the day.
They're in a war zone, actually. This is a war zone.
Ground the drones! Stop the wars! Ground the drones!
Use of drones by the United States undermines law. It undermines morality. It undermines U.S. credibility in the world. About 5 years now, I've been quite concerned about the Reaper drone out at the nearby Hancock Air Base. It's a weaponized robot that not only fascinates, but there's a lot of so-called collateral damage that goes with those destructions of civilians, unarmed people, non-combatants.
You want to see doing stuff? Don't take your goddamn government. You are protesting big person. Don't take your government. You need to turn that off. I'm really tired of this shit.
Overall, we have an outstanding relationship with the community. Very supportive of the military and government, very supportive of the 174th. There are those that maybe not agree with the mission, but we certainly support the fact that they have their right to communicate their opinions and honor those rights.
Can you tell about Mary Anne Grady Flores?
I prefer not to.
They want to scare people. They want to quell dissent. They don't want us American citizens to know what's going on there. But the opposite effect has happened as a result of this local judge sentencing me to 1 year. I heard it through people at the Syracuse Peace Council, and I was shocked. I am somebody that has flown in and out of Syracuse Airport. It's hard to imagine that I'm getting in a plane on one side of the airport, and on the other end of the same campus, they're killing people.
Because you do feel like you're very much a part of that operation, whatever's going on. You're seeing it. You're seeing it probably maybe even a little bit better than some in airplanes. You're hearing everything going on. Everything from the folks on the ground talking on the radios to people back in the ops center. So you get very involved in the operation of what is going on.
We went in October of 2012, and it was at that time that 17 of us blocked the 3 gates, the 2 wing gates and then the main gate. So that's when we went before the local judge, and as we were being arraigned and given the disorderly conduct charges and also the trespass, that's when we started getting this order of protection read to us, and it was, who? Earl A. Evans. Obviously, this is a law that is for domestic violence, sexual abuse order, and it says that language right in the order. I'm not allowed to sexually abuse or molest the guy. But the last line says, I can't go near his place of employment. We went back to the base. I had not intended to violate my order of protection because I was taking photos of them from the roadway. It turns out that the base property goes out to the double yellow line of the middle of the road. And so I was arrested.
This order of protection represents a version of not only mine, but all of our constitutional rights. Every one of us that goes to the base.
Is the sentencing judgment of this court that you be sentenced to a period of 1 year at the Onondaga County Correctional Facility with credit?
And I'm out on appeal right now. I'm not sure what the rest of the process is, but I'm out for the moment. And depending on the appeal, I may be going in to finish the sentence. All of this quibbling about the base boundary is just a huge distraction. The main issue here is the crime of murder going on from within the base. We have a right to dissent, and the military does not have a right to just shoo us away. So we go back.
Hi, everybody. I'm Mary Anne Grady Flores, and I'm very grateful to all of you who have put on this, not just today, but this extended period of time of focus on the drones. And I wanted to start by acknowledging this. How many of you have seen the quilt project that we have hanging here? Can you give a raise of hands? So none of the students have seen it before. Is that correct? Okay. So I wanted to start by saying that when we first got here, I went into the hallway and I was very moved by reading the panels. This is the 5th of the quilts that's hanging. There's others in the hall. And I invite each of us to go out and look at this one as well, and look at the names and the ages of the drone victims. And I just wanted to invite us to start with a moment of silence for those victims. I had a great conversation with Tom, who's Tom Matter, who's the director. Here you are, Tom. Thank you for receiving us in this space. Tom and I spoke very briefly about your campus. This is my first time coming to RPI, and did I say that right? Okay. I do come from serving catering to the Cornell campus, and so I'm somewhat familiar with academia. And I was very grateful to understand what this building is. How many of you have been in this building before? Anybody? Great, okay. How many came last night to the play? Very nice, okay. We can have some good dialogue about this afterwards. So Tom shared with me the purpose and the reason for this building being where it is. And he talked about the fact that this is the very heart of the campus here, and that this space was created to be an intersect for many of the different faith practices. And so I wanted to say that I hope that we can start this whole dialogue around the issue of drones by opening our hearts and starting there, and just knowing that it's our humanity that's at stake here. So I wanted to invite a few people that I spoke to beforehand to come up. Some of the students are going to come up and help me create a human timeline. So those of you who volunteered can come forward right now and take your positions. Thank you. So each of you, if you guys could hold the pages up into the light a little bit. So each of these represent a different action that happened at the Air Force Base that Ed spoke about, Hancock Air Base. And you saw in the video. So this is the Hancock 38, which was actually what you were looking at in the video. All those people lying down with bloody shrouds, sheets with some red paint on them. That was back in 2011. It was the first time I ever got involved with Ed and Anne and many of the people from Syracuse and other upstate cities. Then we had another attempt. Actually, Nick, if you can move to the left a little, there was another attempt of people marching to the base. And before we even got within a quarter of the mile, Nick, you were part of that action. The police came and swooped us up and arrested everybody. We were not even near the base. So this action, we decided, all right, we're doing it different. We're not putting out emails. We're not talking about it on the phone. And we showed up, and that was when we stood at the 3 gates, those 2 wing gates, like I said in the video, and then the front gate. And that's when you saw that colonel, or that soldier that was like, you gotta turn that off. You gotta stop this shit. Anyway, that day was the day that we were brought, we were arrested, we were given our trespass and violation, disorderly conduct, and this is the first time we ever had, we call it the OOPS for short, the Order of Protection. So we'll come over this way. So this is October 2012. We did have a group of us that said, we're going to a lawyer. This oops thing, we don't even know this guy, this colonel. So we're going to go to the court and try to appeal it. So that was happening. And then there was the next group, Ash Wednesday, 2013, excuse me. 8 people went, 8 Catholics, 2 priests, 1 Catholic, she calls herself a Catholic, Quaker Catholic. We had a social worker, we had different folks. So those folks acted on that day. That was the day that I went and took photos. Albert, sorry. So, just a few months later, 31 people stepped into the base. And I do want to say that the first action and this action happened in the context of a mass rally of a couple of hundred people that were on the lawn to the right in front of the base. 31 people stood in the gate, in the roadway, laid down. And then recently, so this is 2013, this is just last year, we had Mark Colville, who's another friend from Connecticut, from Hartford, came with 2 Yale Divinity students. They walked up to the base with flowers and the People's Order of Protection. Call it the POOPS. Sorry. So, thank you. And then, I'll tell you about Mark's trial in a minute. The Hancock 7 just happened this July 23rd. Just as I got out of jail, and 5 days later, my sister Claire and 6 others got arrested. And a number of them had their OOPS, their Order of Protection. And now you're holding the name of Jack Gilroy, who was a part of the Hancock 31 back in April. He was just tried in July while I was in jail. And then Jack is now in jail. He's 79 years old, He's in jail for 3 months, and then he's going to have 3 years probation, plus a fine, plus his DNA has been taken, which happened to me. So anyway, thank you folks. Please stay here, don't leave. I'm going to do a little Q&A here between Ben and I.
And in part, I'm going to be asking Mary Anne about what led to her 1-year sentence. And in coming up to that story, what we kind of see is that we have this timeline here, which is really a representation of really consistent commitment of hundreds and hundreds of people. I think that's 160 arrests, maybe even in the thousands of people that have been doing different sorts of demonstrations around this action in Syracuse. But from 2011, which was the first moment that I was actually started to get involved as well, up to Jack Gilroy's imprisonment and Mary Anne's sentencing, you see a wonderful timeline. You can think of another line coming up in terms of the kinds of consequences and the costs of free speech and protests that get higher and higher as we go along, as the base and the court try to squash dissent throughout it. So you can see this line coming this way and another one going, which is the consequences that people are facing as a result of speaking out against the drone warfare. And I think that maybe it was...
I was going to just mention that Mark Colville, you want to go Mark up? So Mark's just been found guilty after a 2-day trial where he defended himself, and he's facing 2 years and 45 days. The judge, before the trial even started, threatened him in the morning, before the trial started. He took him back in chambers and said, if you're found guilty, I'm giving you the maximum sentence possible. And Mark said, why? He says, because I think you deserve it. Now, how can a judge talk about be impartial with that kind of attitude? Anyway, so
Yeah, so I've had some conversations with Mary Anne, and we just wanted to kind of continue that here. And the first thing that I would often ask about is the first moment when she started to get involved in this work. Why did she decide this was an important issue, especially, and then when did she start to take some of that action?
Yeah, so just in discussing this, I was saying to Ben how I've been involved with the peace movement for many decades now, and my parents before me, my siblings are involved. And I've become aware of the fact that the Pentagon has plans that are open for your review. I don't remember exactly how to name it. It's not Plan 2020, but similar. Anyway, you can look it up for yourselves. But there is a plan by the year 2020 to have total global domination. And I don't know how many of you have ever heard of that in this room. Okay, Ed has. So that helps, and I understand this from a number of different people that have been students of the white papers that come out of the Pentagon. So in deciding that this issue was important, the issue of the drones, I had to understand it in the context of that bigger picture, that macro. And Ed described the resource wars that are part of the driving force behind the use of drones. I understand. How many of you heard of the quote, think globally, act locally? Raise hands. Okay, so in that context, I thought, I heard about, as I said in the video, I had heard about the Hancock witness, that had been happening for a few years before I became aware of it. And so there was a community of different people from all over upstate New York, as Ed mentioned, the different cities that are represented. So there was a community in place already focused on the issue, so it was easy for me to just jump in. So I also heard from my sisters, Ellen and Claire, in Ithaca, that there was a group of about 100 people doing a 4-day walk from Ithaca And they went up through the Onondaga Nation land and took a 4-day walk up to Syracuse to the air base. And it was a group of people from all different multi-racial, multi-ethnic, diverse backgrounds. And so I happened to be sitting in a hospital accompanying my mother for the week. And so I wasn't a part of the walk. I wasn't a part of this sacred time, what they described on their way. But I arrived and there were over 200 people gathered on the lawn. And many of them had come back from Afghanistan and they were sharing the stories of these victims. And you know, a lot of the names are here on the banner, on this quilt and in the hall. One of the things that happened, or what was shared, was, you see this blue scarf I'm wearing? The victims and the families of the victims, especially the young people, have talked about the fact that their desire for peace is that we have no borders, that we have peace, and they use this color blue as a representation of, you know, peace for the whole globe. And that there be peace and that there is no borders. So they've sent us bolts of cloth, and we've come back, and during our trials and during our witnesses at the air base, we do wear the blue scarves. When we've gone to the base, we've carried with us a war crimes indictment, which was written up by some local folks, and then we've included Ramsey Clark's tightening of the language. He was the former Attorney General of the United States. If anybody knows international law, it's this global citizen, Ramsey Clark, who has gone to represent nations in the World Court. And so he helped tighten the language. So these crimes that are listed here, crimes against peace and humanity, violations of the supreme law of the land, which is what the U.S. Constitution, Article 6, Section 2 states that all treaties and protocols that we've signed on to are supreme law of the land. Extrajudicial killings, violations of due process, and so on. So that document is what we carry to the base with us. As Ed said, or maybe you didn't mention this, that we do take a pledge of nonviolence before we go. And then on that first day that I arrived, just moments before, you know, during the protest on the side, on the lawn, there was a reading of the names of the dead. And this is the thing, I think, Ben, that you were asking me, what was it that touched me? It was understanding that there are little ones and so many innocent civilians that are the casualties of these wars. It was that realization and hearing their stories from those that had just come back from Afghanistan that moved me to step into that roadway. And there was the reading of the names of the dead. We each took a sheet, a little strip, and laid it into a little children's wagon, red wagon. And we took a flower and we laid down. And we covered ourselves with these sheets, like I said before, they had the red paint on them. And we stayed there silently for about 10 minutes. So, it was a powerful moment. It helped me to bring back the humanity of who it is that's on the other end of our remote control, attack on others, as Ed said. And that was the beginning.
And then we know from the video that the result of different actions was to give this 1-year sentence that you're waiting on the appeal for. But I wonder if you could go to and talk about the demonstration and actions that led up to getting that, the order of protection and then the 1 year sentence, just kind of briefly.
So, on October 25th, 2012, when we did the action where we stepped in front of the 3 gates, is what the first time that 17 of us, I am not the only one that has an order of protection. I want to make that clear. There's over 50 people that have these orders, and it's ridiculous. None of us know the colonel. We've never seen him before. We've never had a conversation. He's never come out to the gate to say hi, or, you know. So, anyway, we did that action. And we did go out, as I said earlier, we did try to appeal that order. It turns out that it's a temporary order of protection. It goes away once you have a trial or you've been sentenced. I'm trying to remember, am I clear?
At the end of the trial.
At the end of the trial, it goes away. But it turns out that at the end of some of the trials that we've had, we've been reissued 2-year permanent orders of protection. And it turns out that this is the way that the military has chosen to shut down and quell dissent. And it's a really dangerous precedent. And actually, how many of you know of the anti-fractivist movement? Have you heard of fracking? You know, the process of taking shale oil or gas out of the earth. So there has been orders of protections given to those folks as well. There's all kinds of people that could be given these things if it's allowed and accepted within New York State against us that are, you know, the military base wants to keep us away. So the court has shown how it's in collusion with the base by going along with this. And it's really dirty business. And it's really, I would invite all of you to take time to come to some of these trials. There are 22 people that are going on trial or are going for appeal. I'm one of them, but there's, like I said, I'm not the only one. I am one small part in a very large movement of over 1,000 people that have participated in one way or another. And we do need new, fresh blood. We need you folks to come. We have folks that come from this area that can help with rides, and we can hook you up with that. So, anyway, so...
And then maybe moving to, what was the specific action that you were in, after which you were given the order of protection, and then, and especially the one in which you had supposedly violated the order of protection?
Okay, so that was the Ash Wednesday where we had the 8 Catholics. So my sister Ellen got a new iPhone. I didn't know how to use an iPhone at the time. This was back in February of 2013, so it's over a year and a half ago. So I went across the street. I had my own old dumb phone, and I had a camera. And then I went to get Ellen's iPhone, and she was like, "Mary Anne, you can load this stuff up to Facebook. Oh, by the way, I do media stuff. That's my gift that I bring to the table to this movement. I work on press releases. Ed helps me with the editing. and I do feel it's really important to get the word out about these war crimes that are happening in our name, from our backyard. And make this known that we're doing this in conjunction with other actions that are happening around the country and around the world. So my role that day was to go and take photos and also to be a support person. So I'm going to ask us to do a little thing here. This is, okay. So let's say the guys in the back, raise your hands. That's the guard shack, just for argument's sake. And down here is where there's 2 roadways. One roadway, as you saw, goes in, and another one comes out. So where Ed and Mickey are standing, or sitting, well, let's say, as you're coming out of the base, there's a white line in the middle of the road. I mean, a white line painted on the road that you stop at a stop sign or at intersection. All 8 of the protesters were standing out here beyond that white line on the ground. And then because it was Ash Wednesday, they took symbolically, they got a box of ashes from somebody's house, and they symbolically poured the ashes on the ground. So it's about where the table is, or maybe where you're sitting then. And then I was out here taking photos of them, back and forth, back and forth. And then about 10 minutes before the end of all of that, I left. I mean, before they got arrested, 10 minutes before they got arrested, the cops had arrived. They were having conversations. There was one friend who had twisted his ankle really badly, sitting on a tripod. And one of the cops came up to him and says, "You're not allowed to be here. You can be across the street." And I came up behind the cop and I said, "No, he has a right and a privilege to be there, to uphold the international law, the U.S. Constitution, Article 6. And then I left. I crossed the street and I started taking more pictures. I joined Anne. And then I had to go pick up these folks from the police station after they got arrested. So I said, I'm going to go down the road to the diner, get a cup of coffee, use the bathroom, and be ready to pick them up. So I leave. When I'm down the road, the cops come and pick me up. And so we go to the court. I'm being taken away in handcuffs, been given $2,500 bail. And by the way, that bail was collected thinking they were going to have to pay the bail for 8 people or 7 people. Instead, it all went to me. Everybody else was allowed out on their own recognizances. So I'm being taken away in handcuffs. And my friend Mark Carver gets up in the courtroom. He says, "Judge, where's the base boundaries?" And he says, "The double yellow line in the middle of the road." I've never heard of that. How many of you have ever heard of something like that? 3. Okay, that's about the average of what I find when I do ask people or tell people about this. So I go to jail, I get bailed out, and then was on trial this May, and that's when I read a statement. Go back.
Yeah, so maybe we could jump up to that, and so this was where Mary Anne had been arrested for allegedly violating the order of protection. And so I want to ask kind of about the trial itself. What sort of evidence was allowed to be presented enough, and how it ended up that you were charged and sentenced for the year?
Okay. And now we have to wrap up because we have to go and read the Q&A time. All right, so just quickly, Colonel Evans was brought to the stand. There was a 6-jury trial. One of the jurors was the best friend of one of the judge that signed my order of protection, which I thought was a little bit problematic. Anyway, Colonel Evans said, "No, I don't know Mary Anne Grady Flores. I've never had a conversation with her. I don't know this woman. The order of protection, that's just a piece of paper. I just want those protesters away from my base." And then he gets off the stand. And the police video showed where I was. It showed a jogger running by. I thought I was in the public access space, but no. So that's the trial. I was found guilty. I was sentenced on July 10th of this year. And I read a statement beforehand, which I'd like to read to you now. So what I said was, Your Honor, a series of judicial perversions brings me here before you tonight. First, I was convicted of violating an order of protection that represents a perversion of its intended use to protect victims of domestic violence. This order allegedly protects the commander of the military base who said himself under oath that he neither knows me nor needs protection from me. The real purpose of this order is to stifle dissent at the base. Second, as my 11-year-old neighbor Lucian reminded me recently, this order breaks the law. So I had a neighbor friend come over and he says, what's going on at the base, Mary? Because he had heard I was arrested. And I said, Lucian, have you heard of an order of protection? He goes, no. And I said, well, it's when sometimes families have violence, somebody needs to stay away, and, oh yeah. And I said, well, that's what the colonel of the military took out against me. He said, what? You're breaking the law. He took his little 11-year-old hands like this. And then he says, haven't they heard of not the 3rd, not the 5th, not the 15th, but the First Amendment? He said, freedom of speech and freedom, the right to assemble. And I said, Lucian, would you come with me to the court? Help these guys out a little bit. So, back to the perversion. So it's perverting my constitutional right to freedom of speech and my right to protest any injustice. The third perversion, my jury trial represented a perversion of justice because the jury was forbidden to hear 3 key facts. All the protesters that I photographed that day as their press liaison were acquitted. I myself was previously acquitted just this past January from the October, here. Come forward. So this action where we, covered the 3 gates, that time we were acquitted of trespass at the base because even the police didn't know what the base boundaries was. One or a few of the police said, oh, the guard shack where the perimeter fence is the base boundaries. Others said, oh, by the lawn. Others said by the curb. Only one cop out of 10 said the double yellow line in the middle of the road. So the judge found us not guilty. So, because even the police could not specify the base boundaries, an acting Supreme Court judge ruled that the order of protection is invalid because its language is excessively vague and it shows no evidence of any threat. It said, it was found invalid because the colonel could not identify any one of us, or he couldn't identify Dan Finley. That was the one protester that it was appealed upon. And also, because of its vagueness, it doesn't delineate how close or far we have to be from the guy's place of employment. The fourth and most important perversion is the reversal of who is the real victim here. The commander of a military base whose drones kill innocent people halfway around the world, or those innocent people themselves who are the real ones in need of protection from the terror of U.S. drone attacks. As a nonviolent grandmother of 3 and a principal caregiver for my mother, prepare for jail, itself a perversion, I stand before you remorseful, less for what I've done than for what I have not yet done to keep my own country from perpetrating its ongoing acts of violence and injustice.
I'm going to try to keep pretty brief. What's the end of the program today? After how much time do we have?
It's at 3:50.
3:50. Okay. So I'm going to try to keep a good amount of time for us to have some Q&A. So maybe I can try to do this in about 10 minutes. As I said, I'm a PhD student at Syracuse University. I'm also the founder of an organization called Syracuse Students Against Drones. And I work with a couple of other campus groups as well. One on fossil fuel divestment. I don't know if any of you know this campaign. But I wrote a piece a couple of years ago, and it pulls from the report that Ed had shown you earlier, Living Under Drones, this 2 law schools at Stanford and New York University that put this together. And the first 2 numbers are from their research. The second 2 numbers are from the Pew Global Survey, which they do every year, about different attitudes on things. And this one was about attitudes in Pakistan and also towards the United States. So I'm going to go through these numbers, and I'm going to go through them because I think that that they discredit and put into question a few of the main things that we hear about drones. One of them is that these are precise tools that only kill threats to the United States. And then the other one that we sometimes hear is that we're helping out the people in these countries. For instance, in Pakistan, we're killing the Taliban, and thus we're doing something to actually help them out. And these numbers actually, I think, discredit both of those arguments. So the first one, 49. 49 is the number of people killed in U.S. drone strikes for every high-level suspect. So for every person that the U.S. military knows and is a suspected terrorist, and we should really underline that, at their very worst, they are suspects for a crime that they have not yet committed. At the very worst, in many cases, that's the worst thing that they've done. They're suspected of having thoughts or maybe of beginning planning. So that's 1 out of every 50. The other 49, we really, in most cases, it seems, don't know much about them at all. And that could be clear as it comes out of the Obama administration. And the official numbers of this that the U.S. State Department would give are very different, and this is the reason why. It's because President Obama has embraced the disputed method of counting civilian casualties. So it counts all military-age males in the strike zone as combatants. And so you have high numbers of combatants. And I think that this is obviously absurd if we maybe switch the lens for a moment, right? So think about this. Think about it if Al-Qaeda, for instance, was counting civilian deaths this way. So we could go back to thinking about 9/11. There's about 3,000 people killed between the two towers, right? What if Al-Qaeda looked at that and said, okay, there's 70% of the people there are males over the age of 18. They're militants. We killed 70% of militants in that strike. This is, of course, absurd. It's outrageous. And then think about, because it's not just that, but it's also that Al-Qaeda globally doesn't have legitimacy. They don't have moral legitimacy. They don't have the power to have moral legitimacy. But to think a step beyond that not only would they be making that outrageous claim, but all the other powerful nations in the world agree with them on that outrageous claim. That they support that outrageous claim and those actions. And then think about what that feeling would be like for us in the United States, or for the families of those victims. Just because they were 18 and male, that they got called terrorists and militants, and everyone around the world believes it. So this is the method that through which we're told that there's very little civilian deaths. And then what it really comes down to is this. They count the corpses or not, and they're not really sure who they are. This is the reality of drone strikes. 3, the number of children killed in U.S. drone strikes for every high-level suspect. The partial list of children killed in Pakistan. Nur Aziz, 8 male. Abdul Wasit, 17 male. Nur Saeed, 8 male. Wajid Nur, 9 male. Saeed Wali Shah, 7 male. Aisha, 3 female. Switching now to global opinion. I think this is from the 2012 Pew Research report. 11 is the percentage of Pakistanis who hold a favorable view of the Taliban. Unlike what we hear sometimes, or I read in comments on the end of some articles that I'll write for the Syracuse Post-Standard, kind of identifying everyone at fault for the Taliban or something like that anyone killed, it's the Taliban's fault or something. But it makes really clear that Pakistanis are against terrorism just as much as United States citizens are. It also saw that, this report also said that 98% of Pakistanis said that terrorism was a major problem in the country. So it's something that they care about and that they're worried about as well. But it would seem by this number that the United States, who's this very self-identified terrorist killer, we would maybe be popular in Pakistan for what we're doing, if that's supposedly what we're doing, right? But for that, we just have to see the next number. And the number doesn't change. It's exactly the same. 11 is the percentage of Pakistanis who hold a favorable view of the United States. And so when we're equal in terms of favorability with the country that we're supposedly helping by reducing the terrorist threat, we have to really look at ourselves and wonder what it is that we're doing in that country. And if we're as favorable as a terrorist organization, what is it that we're doing in that country? I'm going to sit with this for a second and kind of switch gears here. What I want to talk about now is the sort of social movements that we need to combat this. And I think at this point, with Ed and Mary Anne and I talking, I think we've laid out the injustice and the immorality of war and of drone strikes. And the real question then becomes, what do we do about it? And so I'm going to talk a little bit about some of my own experiences in doing anti-war organizing on campuses and other sorts of organizing. And those other sorts of organizing are actually really connected. And we've heard that a little bit from Ed and Mary Anne too. And that's actually where I want to start. Actually, maybe we'll go through this quick, I'm sorry. A view of, this quote has always stuck with me, a view of what happens just after a drone strike. They're just pieces of flesh lying around after a strike. You can't find bodies. So the locals pick up the flesh and curse America. They say that America is killing us inside our own country, inside our own homes, and only because we are Muslims. This gets at 11% again. Why we're not popular. Barack Obama, he's talking about Israel's right to self-defense here, but then you match that with a drone, which you see the New York on the wing there. There's no country on earth that would tolerate missiles raining down on its citizens from outside its borders. And then Malala, who just won the Nobel Peace Prize, and really deserving in that. Here speaking to another Nobel Peace Prize winner, Barack Obama. She says, after they had the conversation, to the media she was describing what they talked about, I expressed my concerns that drone attacks are fueling terrorism. Innocent victims are killed in these acts, and they lead to resentment among the Pakistani people. And what she tells Barack Obama to do is, instead of sending jobs, send teachers to schools. So Malala, who I think many of you probably know of her, know that she was shot by the Taliban. So the people that were supposed to be going after and targeting a victim of the Taliban is telling Barack Obama, who's ordering those drone strikes, send schools, don't send any more bombs. What you're doing is fueling this war, not stopping it. To get to the point that I was making a little bit earlier, we need to start linking up issues. And Martin Luther King Jr. always did this very well. He wasn't just talking about racism in the United States. He was always making those connections. We must rapidly begin the shift from a thing-oriented society to a person-oriented society. When machines and computers, profit motives, and property rights are considered more important than people, the giant triplets of racism, materialism, and militarism are incapable of being conquered. So I'm going to look at a couple of these intersections. I think it's very clear to me anyway, and other folks that look into this, that without racism it's really hard to have war. And one of the main ways of feeling like you can enslave someone or bomb someone is to think of those people as less than human. And that language is written right into the way that the U.S. Defense Department talks about victims of drone strikes. So bug splat is an official term for software that calculates collateral damage. And then I've got this banner on the bottom here. INSECT is the acronym that Syracuse University uses for its Center for Security and Terrorism. So we see the use of thinking about the people that we are bombing as bugs and insects. And this is the view of a drone pilot's view of the results. It's like looking at bug splat. And if we're treating human sure.
So there's the photo that you're looking at is there's a project that people on the ground in Afghanistan and in Pakistan where they took this image and they laid it out in a big field digitally so that when the drone pilots, or I should say the cameras of the drones were picking up the image, it was on that gray screen in the drone computer room so that they could see that they're hitting human beings instead of just a bug splat.
I wanted to get into a little bit of militarism at home. Of course, I think many people are aware of the militarization of the police, and it comes to be very clear in Ferguson and around the world. In some ways, this industry that we have that is creating weapons, that's arming the world, which is another thing that Malala had also said to President Obama, was she told him to stop arming the world. And it's such a strange thing to be. Like, this is the strange world that we live in, where one Nobel Peace Prize winner has to say to the other, when you're creating arms and spreading them all over the world, that's not peaceful. What a wild world we live in, if that's the case. But in fact, that we run out of targets, and then our own populations become targets, and then those machines of war come back into our own communities, specifically into communities of color. And so then we have a war on our own people with those same tools. We've run out of other targets, and so they come back home. And then, of course, Martin Luther King Jr. is really getting into the economic analysis. What are we losing in terms of things that we could be living with when we're spending all of this money on death? So he says, a true revolution of values will lay hands on this world of order and state of war. This way of settling differences is not just. A nation that continues year after year to spend more money on military defense than programs of social uplift is approaching spiritual death. And I want to look just really quickly at what are some of the consequences of that. What sort of life could we be having for the death that we're causing around the world? And the best example of this probably is the war in Iraq. So the war in Iraq, there's an analysis done by Brown University's Watson Institute for International Studies. The war at that point, it was a couple of years ago, it cost about $2 trillion. But they looked at its 40-year costs, and they look at long-term costs, especially around veterans that have that need medical attention and medical benefits. And so the real costs of the war continue to go up even after the war has stopped. So they estimated that over 40 years, even after the Iraq War has ended, that the cost will increase to $6 trillion, okay? So $6 trillion going to what, I think, do most of you know about the war in Iraq and the different justifications? First, it was that Saddam Hussein had a connection to Al-Qaeda. That turned out to be blatantly false. The second was that they had weapons of mass destruction. That turned out to be blatantly false. And then third, George Bush just went ahead with, he's a dictator, and so we have to oppose him, which there's lots of dictators in the world, plenty of them that the United States partners with regularly. It's not a great idea to go to war for that and tear apart a country for it. The U.S. cost in terms of lives was about 6,000, about double that were killed in 9/11. And the Iraqi death was up in the hundreds of thousands. So we have to think about those real human tolls for getting rid of one dictator. And of course we know with ISIS now that we didn't solve a single thing by introducing all of that war into Iraq. But aside from all of those, which are really moral imperatives and talking about lives, what did we lose in terms of what could have given life to our country here with that $6 trillion? Well, for one, we hear a lot about the national debt. $6 trillion is half of the national debt that we have right now. So we could cut our national debt in half this minute if we hadn't gone to war in Iraq. And then, if you look at this, the annual cost of the war, $200 billion, the Iraq War, annual cost of universal healthcare for every single person in the United States who doesn't have it, just half of that. So we could have had healthcare for everyone in this country instead of death and warfare and destruction for everyone in Iraq. Universal preschool for everyone. Could have had that along with healthcare, $35 billion. Security, we could have carried out what the 9/11 Commission recommended in terms of security, so you could still be safe too. You don't always have to be carrying out war to be safe either. Cancer research, $6 billion. We could double and triple cancer research for that. Immunizations for the world's children against measles, whooping cough, tetanus, tuberculosis, and polio. Just $0.6 billion. We could have done all of this good around the world with it, and more. All of that doesn't even add up to $200 billion. So think of all of the good that we could be doing for the world and for ourselves if we just stopped dropping bombs on people. If we stopped being imperialistic, if we stopped working under a racist logic that allows us to go into these countries and think of them as less than human. Eduardo Galeano puts it really well. Each minute, $3 million are spent in militaries around the world. Each minute, 15 children die of starvation and incurable diseases. Another world is possible. Okay. I think that this is where I want to get into what it is that we can be doing. And I mean we really explicitly and literally, the people in this room. The organizations that I've worked with at Syracuse University, right now I'm working with a coalition of different groups across campus. On Monday we're going to have a rally that we're expecting upwards of 200 people there. We've been working together in groups this big, doing organizing and coming up with demands lists and taking action. But all of that work starts with 3 or 4 people in a room. It starts with an email list going around a room like this, and somebody taking ownership of that email list and saying, I'm going to call a meeting of people that care about this, and we're going to act locally, as Mary Anne said. That's how things start. And it's our responsibility to stand up and start that and to participate. And so I'm hoping that in discussion, and maybe I would like to start that, is that if people in this room can think about what you all can be doing locally, and I wonder if someone would volunteer to send an email list around and take care of that email list if there was a student group that wanted to get going on this. Or maybe there's already student groups that are involved in this sort of thing, and you can make that announcement and get people involved. And I think somebody needs to take ownership of that, a group that's concerned about war, militarism, racism, these intersections. So I think with that, we want to really turn it over to you and hear if you have questions, but also if you have ideas about what students can be doing on this campus with these issues.
Question in the back. Do you project or you need this mic?
I can probably project, yeah.
All right, let's hear it.
All right, I actually got multiple for all of you guys. Okay, so you better do this.
Well, we've got about,
It should
let's
go
start
quick.
with one, and we've got time to circle back to you, we will.
All right. So, because the main point of this was that drones kill civilians, right? So, could you please explain to me the difference between a drone killing a civilian and a soldier killing a civilian? Do you really think that there's a great difference between the people who pilot the drones and the soldiers on the ground? Do you think if we got rid of the drones that there would be no more war? Do you think that without the means of drones that war would go away and that civilian death would stop?
Yeah. I would say that war would not go away, continue to have strife and conflict and killing and massacres. The qualitative difference between that soldier who's killing civilians and is that the soldier presumably is taking some kind of risk. And some of those that he's killing, she's killing, have a chance to fight back. There is no fighting back against drones. The other difference, there's more, is that huge profits are being made by U.S. corporations in this drone warfare. That's what's driving drone warfare, is the profit motive. Which is also true, I think, with some of the soldiers on the ground, not those individuals personally, but what's behind their being in these countries in the first place.
Well, the other thing I would add is it is against, talking about the U.S. case, the Uniform Code of Military Justice, for a soldier to kill a civilian under any circumstance. He or she can be held legally liable, can end up spending the rest of all. As a matter of fact, open to the death penalty in extreme cases, and the rest of their life in Lebanon in more normal cases. That's not the case for drones. Drones have an impunity from legal liability than an individual soldier. I think it's a major distinction.
I believe drone pilots can get arrested for that, and there really isn't actually a major distinction. And not only that, but I do not believe that. I actually did my point. You guys can go back to later. But I've got plenty more questions for you guys.
Yeah, well, we can move on. I mean, but I think that part of your point is correct in that, like, we're not just against drones, we're against war, obviously. Part of the acting locally is that we have a drone base in our backyard, and so we're resisting there too. So there's parts of the technology that make it a little bit different, a little bit easier, but the real thing I think that all of us has spent a lot of our lives challenging is warfare, and this is part of it.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm not saying
let's hear from somebody else. Thank you. Come back and you get done. Other questions?
I've got
In the back?
I just wanted to point out, historically, we got kicked out of Iraq. The soldiers were under the threat of being arrested as enemy combatants. And it was publicized that we won the war in Iraq, and the total opposite was true.
Any more questions?
Yeah.
Supposedly that's not the war. Do you think countries around the world will forgive this country for what they did? Do you think peace will actually derive from countries that were affected from the United States actions towards them?
This is not exactly an answer to your question, but it does speak to the effects of. And I've heard that the ambassador to Yemen, the U.S. ambassador to Yemen, has stated that for every drone victim, there are at least 30 enemies produced against the U.S. So it's hard to imagine. But it is amazing to see countries like Vietnam, where people have forgiven the U.S. after decades of war making, in that country. And over 1 million Vietnamese, how many Vietnamese were killed?
Well, I see figures like 3 million.
3 million.
Southeast Asia, it's also Laos.
Right, Laos and Cambodia. Yes. So maybe it's possible.
Yeah, and I think that what it's going to take is the world's most powerful country to stop waging war, to do that, and it's our responsibility to do that. And I think maybe what part of the question that you asked speaks to is war something part of human nature, and I think that we have to act as if it isn't, and believe that it isn't, and understand that we can evolve morally, and it's our responsibility to do that. And I think that if we can have empathy for one another, which obviously we can, that we can build that part of us and not the other part of us, and evolve that way.
Something I'd add is that to receive forgiveness, one needs to ask for it. You ever heard that from the American president? For Vietnam or anything since? Other questions? Yeah, please.
Okay, so you guys said that.
No?
You guys said that.
We can't hear you very well.
Alright, you guys said that you.
Hold the mic close to you now.
It's on.
Thank you.
No.
Yes.
There it is.
So, what military base it was that you guys were focusing on?
Hancock. Yeah, Hancock Air Base in Syracuse, New York.
Okay, so I understand that you guys are protesting at the base to try and build awareness, but I don't necessarily believe that protesting at the base is going to stop them from doing their day-to-day activities and promoting drone use or whatever. So I just want to know what you guys are doing on a more large scale to try to prevent that instead of just kind of sitting in front of the air base.
Let me try
Good
to
question.
talk about that. Hancock is a topic today, but those of us that have been organizing and educating about the weaponized drones and surveillance drones have been involved in any number of other initiatives as well, including protesting at the White House, writing letters to the editor, circulating petitions. Some of us have visited with our representatives and their staff on the issue. There's a whole range of activist tactics that we've employed. We've had parades, if you will. We've had, for people of faith, there's been panels. Well, in Onondaga County, where we're from, we've had several panels in Catholic parishes. Now, we're not all Catholic by any means, but that's been something that the Catholic diocese has cooperated in, is having these panels about drones to help educate and to remind the Catholics to come of their moral traditions. So it's not just Hancock by any means.
With that?
So, we talked a lot about Al-Qaeda.
Can you stand up so we can see you and hear you?
You talked a lot about Al-Qaeda, and I feel like now it's more outdated. Now we're talking about ISIS, and limiting any flagrant threats against the country. How do you suggest what do you suggest we take, what measures do we take to deal with ISIS as opposed, instead of drones?
I think it's a question that we get often, and I'm on the steering committee with the Syracuse Peace Council, and we were trying to come up with a statement, and some folks were thinking that, well, what do we do in these situations? What should the United States do? And part of what I want to maybe challenge is the imperative that the United States always has to be doing and acting. And so when you look down into the history of ISIS or Al-Qaeda or the Taliban, you see that the United States is always there in some capacity, whether it's arming people in Afghanistan against the Soviet Union, whether it's toppling Saddam Hussein and then creating the conditions in Iraq today for ISIS to come up. And it's kind of, for me, when I look at that track record, and then I think, well, there's lots of situations here where doing nothing seems much better than what the United States did. So then the question of well, what should we do? There's good answers, but it's hard to think that the United States would follow along with those good answers, those good long-term answers. Supporting refugees in the region, humanitarian aid, working through the United Nations. There's lots of things that the United States could be doing there. I think it's important to try to restrain people from killing one another. But in doing it, the United States has a track record of arming people that are going to be then threats to the United States and other people the next decade or the next year. And so I think that it's important for us to really think about restraining the United States from acting in many cases. And I guess that I would think that is my primary role. It's not giving them the next tactic, the next thing that they should do, but restraint.
I'd like to add to that. The U.S. floods the planet with weapons. Weapons kill people, and corporations in the United States make immense profits by selling weapons. You don't sell weapons unless you keep the pot boiling, and that's historically what's been happening over the past several decades. We kept the pot boiling so more weapons will be bought. Now, when I lived in Iraq in 2003, I saw what was happening there. I experienced it. And it was very clear to me that, and Ben has touched on this already, that in Iraq, the U.S. was dismembering the society, pulling the rug out from underneath that society. It's happened also in Afghanistan. It happened in Libya. It happens in various Latin American countries over the past few decades. Now, that leads to a reaction. Taliban, ISIS, they don't like what's happening to their countries. They resist it, just as we would resist it, just as many people in this room would probably enlist if another country was bombing the hell out of us. Another country was invading the U.S. Many of us here would probably resist that, and that's what's happening in a number of other countries.
And if you think about the fact that the U.S. has over 1,000 military bases around the world, what other nation on the face of the planet has that? Nobody. Even China, who we consider, the last superpower beyond ourselves, does not have one drone base outside of its own borders. We have 153 drone bases in, there's 153 countries with drone bases driven by us. What are we doing?
There's been immense saber-rattling against Iran. It's a potential nuclear power. Just consider the incredible hypocrisy of that. I mean, of course, the U.S. is the major nuclear power. Its very close ally, Israel, is a major nuclear power. Iran is surrounded by hostile nuclear powers, and we are demonizing Iran. Now, one of the interesting things about Iran is that it has not invaded another country in 2 centuries. Did the U.S. say that? Did Israel say that? The Soviet Union has said that.
This brings me to a point, which is, where do we get our source of information? Are we reading or hearing the mainstream media, CNN, NBC, or MSNBC? Where do we get our news from? Can some of you tell me? You get it online? Do you have an alternative community radio station here in Albany or Troy? You do. WAMC. Do you have Democracy Now? How many?
Yeah, on the campus radio station, WRPI, 9 to 10 every morning, Monday through Friday.
And how many of you students listen to that radio station? No hands up. Okay, so can I invite a challenge here? Can you guys turn, or even if you're not up to, what time is it on?
9 to 10,
9
Monday
to 10.
through Friday.
Okay, that's a little early for a lot of students, I understand that. So, would you listen to it on your podcast or just watch it online? I watch it online. I'm a cook, I can't always turn the, in Ithaca we have an exceptional assortment of times and ways of listening to Democracy Now! But that's just a beginning point of alternative news, and I would strongly recommend that we do that for ourselves in order to get a sense of, the question that you were just asking, what about ISIS? What should be our response? If we're looking at things through the paradigm, through the American press, which is owned by the corporations that are profiteering on war, instruments of war, we're not going to get the real story. And by the way, Ben was talking about the intercepted movements, and I see some hands up. I'll shut up in 1 second. The global warming issue, which I understand, I'm learning slowly, is probably the #1 issue. If we look at the militarism and the fact that the U.S., our U.S. military is, what's the word? They are not held accountable to the standards of emissions that the rest of us are. If you had one F-16 used in 1 hour, it would be equal to what any one of us would use in terms of the carbon footprint in our lifetime. It takes, 1 gallon? 5 gallons to move an Abrams tank 1 mile. So anyway, that's just another thought.
We've got time for one more question.
You guys have cited a lot of figures and facts, and I was wondering if you had a works cited slide, or I was wondering where you get your information from. Predominantly.
Yeah, so this report that Ed had held up it's called Living Under Drones, and this is the one that's put together by Stanford and NYU's law schools. So the two of them put together this, and so the first two numbers that I went through, the 49 killed for every 1 high-level target, and the 3 children for every high-level target. Those come from this report. The two numbers that I gave, the percentages, polling about favorability for Taliban in the United States, that comes from the Pew Global Research Report. And so Pew, does anyone know Pew?
Sure. Here, just in the interest of time, let me offer to send the students a series of links. I've probably got 100 websites with 100 drone reports. People have been writing outstanding scholarship for a good decade on these things, including the legal aspects, the human rights aspects, the United Nations take on it, the economic consequences. There's a whole bunch of really good stuff. But again, we're out of time. Can we please, and it sounds like Mary Anne, have you got stuff we can grab on the way out?
Yes.
Okay, good.
This is the 22 people that are facing fire. And it has a fact sheet on the back.
All right, I want to give you a hand of applause for being here this afternoon. Thanks very much.
I invite any student that wants to be involved in something, an organization, or that already is, stick around and come up to the front of the stage and maybe we can talk to them.
Also,